they're ubiquitous in Tibetan Buddhism, in Tibetan art, Tibetan sculpture. Even you actually find evidence of them even in Tibetan architecture. Interesting. And they represent three of the qualities or aspects of enlightenment, or you could say of the enlightened mind. So compassion, Avalokitsehvara, wisdom, Manjushu, and then power, Vajrayana. So we have these three figures here, and we're also going to be doing a little bit of referencing these smaller figures, which are also representations of the same deities. They're in color, so they're a little bit maybe easier to see some of the detail. Before we really dive into some of the specifics, just a word about what a Tibetan deity is, especially in relation to Tibetan art. So a Tibetan deity, these particular deities are, from a general point of view, known as bodhisattvas. Bodhi is the same as Buddha in many ways, enlightened, right? Or awakened, actually, more literally. And sattva just means being. And it's typically a bodhisattva. A bodhisattva is somebody that has an insight into the ultimate nature of reality. That's one of the defining characteristics of a bodhisattva. They also make this wish to compassionately free all sentient beings from negativity or from the continuing cycle of death and rebirth known as samsara in Buddhism. So from a general perspective, these are very high level, certainly enlightened beings, but are not yet Buddhas. Now in the Tibetan tradition, there's also what's known as a tantric perspective. And from the tantric teachings, which are within the tradition seen as perhaps a more thorough understanding of things, sometimes known as higher. They use that terminology. They actually are Buddhas that are manifesting as bodhisattvas. So you'll sometimes hear, oh, that's the Buddha of compassion, or that's the Buddha of power. And that's not wrong. Just know that they're also known as bodhisattvas as well. So, the first bodhisattva, we'll actually back up a little bit and talk just briefly. Some of you, I think, weren't here last time. The purpose of Tibetan art is not self-expression. It's actually to lead the person that's viewing it to a state of at least a glimpse of their own authentic nature. There are lots of ways to talk about that. Buddha nature is one, emptiness, clear light, all these words, they're descriptions of what we basically are, which at our heart, we're infinite, or at least infinitely interconnected. So that's the point of Buddhist art. So when I'm talking about these figures, I'm going to be talking about them as, individuals, but know that at a very deep level, they're representations of the mind of enlightenment itself. Okay. So the first image is Avalokitsehvara. And Avalokitsehvara is a Sanskrit word. It means, it literally means the Lord who looks down upon the world, who gazes down upon the world. It implies compassion. And he has 4 arms, you can notice. He's known as the Bodhisattva of compassion. And he's very much connected with Tibet. Actually, from almost like a folkloric perspective, Tibetans really view him as the patron saint of Tibet. And consequently, you have many high-level lamas, high-level teachers, high-level gurus that are associated with Avalokitsehvara. The most notable of which is His Holiness the Dalai Lama, who is known as the main incarnation at this time of Avalokitsehvara. So within all Tibetan art, we can understand it at the level of the story. So there's a story associated with everything. Oftentimes many stories. And then we can also understand it from the perspective of iconography. So one of the stories about Avalokitsehvara is that many eons ago, he made the vast and profound wish to liberate all sentient beings, to free them from their suffering. And he was going through and doing this and meeting with some success. And then, according to the story, he sort of cleared out this one particularly painful room. And then he closed his eyes, took a breath, relaxed for a moment, and then backsliding happened. And all of a sudden, it was full again. And at that moment, he thought, I don't know if I can do this. And because of that one moment of doubt, he had this, his vow was broken, so to speak, so his body shattered into many different pieces. And the best part of the story is his teacher came, who is Amitabha, also known as the you translate that as the Buddha of infinite light. His teacher came and said, what happened? And then sort of miraculously put him back together and reformed him in this way that he was more able to serve sentient beings. So sometimes you'll see Avalokitsehvara, there's a very common representation with 1,000 different arms, hands, an eye in each one. Better able to serve sentient beings, 11 heads. So that's one of the legends surrounding Avalokitsehvara. If you look at his hand mudras, mudra again means seal, and specifically in this context, it means the placement of a figure's hands. And there's a lot of meaning that goes into the placement of a figure's hands. They're not haphazard at all. And you can see in his left hand, well, he has 4, so he has 2 here in the prayer position. And then his left one is over here, and it's holding a lotus. Now in Tibetan Buddhist art, very broadly, the left side typically represents wisdom. And it's not the wisdom that's an accumulation of knowledge, it's the wisdom that's an insight into reality. That part is key. It's a clear scene into how things actually are. That's the nature of wisdom. It's not something that you sort of build up or create. It's not a thing that is compounded. Because if it were, then sooner or later it could go away, right? And if we attain enlightenment and then it goes away, it's not much use in attaining enlightenment. So, the wisdom side is holding this lotus. You can see it over here. This is the same figure. Over here he's holding the lotus. It's a little bit pink. There could be slightly different shades. From what I've seen, I don't know, we can check in with Tashi about some of the traditional aspects of that. And the lotus represents a purity, but also a true blossoming of wisdom. So a lotus, if you don't know, a lotus is planted in mud, in muck, and not very deep water, shallow water. And then it rises up out of the mud, and then it blossoms in this beautiful, beautiful flower. And as it rises, it doesn't matter how dirty the water is, it grows up through that muck without even a shred of that dirt. So it's this representation that even though we seem to be mired in negativity or mired in sometimes painful emotions, we still, at a very deep level, we're untouched by that, or at least our enlightened essence is untouched by it, and it grows out of that. So that's the lotus, the one on his left hand. If we go over to the right side, it's not yet painted in. It is over here. On this one, he's holding mala. Mala is a Sanskrit term meaning mala. He's holding prayer beads, essentially. Mala just means garland. In Tibetan, it's Chenrezig. And he's holding that in his right hand, and he's saying a mantra. He's consistently saying the mantra. Very often, the mala will be in the figure 8 shape, and that's an interesting analog to the continuity of infinity, which I like to think of. Not a traditional explanation, but I think there's something there. And he's saying this mantra, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, Om Mani Padme Hum, constantly, continually. Many of you, I'm sure, have heard of this mantra. And I'm gonna come back to that mantra in just a second, but I want to tell you that in the middle of his hands, he's holding a blue jewel known as a Chintamani. Chinta means mind, and Mani means jewel. And here, it's the idea that it's a wish-fulfilling jewel. Now, in the Buddhist imagination, the essence of consciousness actually resides in the center of the heart, not unlike many other spiritual traditions. So the message here is that the heart, literally your deepest level of awareness, is truly a wish-fulfilling jewel. That if you can hold something, if you hold an aspiration, especially one that's in line with an enlightenment interest, wishing the best for all sentient beings, that truly becomes a source of great joy for yourself and for others. So that's the message on the Chintamani, the wish-fulfilling jewel. Now, we talked about the wisdom side, and I forgot to tell you that this side is the compassion side, or sometimes called the method side. So it's like the active side of things. And that's why over here he's doing something. He's saying the mantra, right? Now, the interesting thing is, this goes with the entire motif of the triad. These things are not separate from each other. So we can talk, in our mind, we think compassion is here, wisdom is here, there's some interplay. But actually within the Buddhist understanding, those things are the exact same. They're actually just manifestations of the exact same thing happening. So from a wisdom perspective, I'm deeply interconnected with all sentient beings. Deeply. On a fundamental, authentic level. I see myself as separate from everybody. And because of that, I suffer through my ups and downs, and trials and tribulations and all of that. But through compassion, through wishing the best, or literally compassion means wanting others not to suffer. Even in English too, calm. Calm means with, C-O-M, and then passion is an old term that means suffering. It wasn't like, hobbies and interests. So it's the ability to stay with suffering, to be with suffering. And so this compassion, from one perspective, can lead into wisdom, and then wisdom then generates compassion. But from an enlightened perspective, from somebody that has actually attained a deep understanding of their own authentic nature, they're one and the same. Naturally, just by restingness, their compassion will rest. For us, or for me, maybe probably not for you, but for me, I have to sort of work at it with compassion. You can put effort into it. But if you can really get into experiencing this, the ultimate reality of yourself, your Buddha nature, then it naturally flows forward.